Hey friends, welcome back to the Crooked Spoon. I'm so glad you're here. In today's video, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a lattice top for your pie. Here I have pie crust that I've previously made, and each portion that I've just cut will cover one pie crust. So one for the bottom and one for the top. It's been in my refrigerator overnight and then was sitting on my counter for about an hour in order to get it to a great temperature and consistency for me to be able to roll it out. It's always helpful to have some bench flour in order for your pie crust not to stick to your counter or stick to your rolling pin. This pie crust recipe, which I'll share in the show notes, results in 2 9-inch crusts. I am using a 9-inch disposable pan and will work on rolling this bottom crust out. I always like to mention a little bit about food safety and food sanitation in my videos. When we are bakers and cookers, we constantly have to wash both our hands and our surfaces. So before I ever roll out a crust like this, my countertop is first washed with an antibacterial soap and then is also wiped down with a disinfectant wipe. I like to use 7th generation. Here's that 9-inch disposable pie pan that I'll be using, and I'm just using it to check my size. In addition, I've obviously washed my hands. If I were to have jewelry or my nails painted or a Band-Aid, I would be required to wear gloves. If you're new to making pies, there are some tools you can use, little bands that you can buy to put on your rolling pin to help you understand what sort of thickness we are looking for in pie crust. I'm continually feeling the dough. I'm moving the dough so it doesn't stick. And with enough time, you get an idea of what your thickness of your bottom crust should be. Here's a little trick on how to transfer your dough onto your pan. And I just want to make sure that it is resting on the bottom in all areas so that when I pour my filling in, nothing will tear. There's my bowl of ice water that I'm preparing. That will come in handy for when I need to seal my top crust to my bottom crust. And there is my previously prepared cherry filling. And I will also include that recipe in the show notes. This filling has been thickened with cornstarch, and because it's been in the refrigerator overnight, it does look much thicker and chunkier than it would. But in the oven, all of that will be smoothed out. A beautiful, rich color, sweet, dark cherries. I like to use a food scissor that helps me trim my crust very quick and easy. I'm going around the edge, and maybe there's just a little bit of overhang, but especially with a disposable pan, you want to be very mindful not to have your crust overhang, as it really could in the oven when it's baking, tear off of your pie because of the weight of the dough. So I'm just trimming it all the way around, getting it ready for when it's time to make the lattice. Now, don't get rid of those scraps of dough. I love having extra dough at the end to make little roll-ups, little rugellas with different ingredients like jams or chocolate. Always a fun thing to have for my family after a day of baking. Okay, so here is my second half of dough meant for one full 9-inch pie crust. With a cherry pie, I like to make a lattice crust. So I am going to roll this dough out in more of a rectangle shape, more oblong than round. And that's because I really want to have about 8 to 10 strips of dough that I'm going to use to make the lattice pattern on the top of my cherry pie. I do want it to be the same thickness as I've done for my bottom crust. So somewhere around 1/8 of an inch or less. And again, you can use those great tools that help you figure out the thickness. But with time and practice, it gets easier. And when it comes to cutting your lattice, you could use a pizza cutter. You could use a bench scraper, but I prefer just to use a chef's knife. I know it's going to be sharp enough to get through, and the blade is straight enough. I'm going to cut off my little ragged excess piece there, but again, add it to my pile for later. And I'm just going to slowly make as many 1/2-inch strips as I can. I have made crusts with thinner, and I've made crusts with thicker strips of lattice. It's all preference. You just don't want to overload the top of your pie to be sure that it bakes evenly and that your edges, your crust, is not too thick. All right, there's my ice water that I'm going to use to dip my fingers in. Again, with pie crust, you want to keep the butter as cold as possible and the vegetable shortening as cold as possible. So ice water helps do that. There's my beautiful bottom crust with my filling, and my first strip goes right across the middle. And notice how the edges of that lattice strip just get pinched off where my bottom crust ends. And now I go perpendicular right across. And so now becomes the over-under time. If my one strip went under, now it needs to go over. And I'm being mindful to make the space in between my strips equal to the width of my strips. So on this pie, it's going to be about 1/2 inch. So if I want to add a strip there, I need to pull this one back in order for that strip to go under. Now, I really enjoy making a lattice top on the pie. To me, it's very calming and sort of meditative. But if this process is stressful and the idea of having to pull back your strips gets you anxious, this could easily be done on wax paper or parchment paper on the countertop, off of your pie. And then you can flip it on top. Or if the whole over-under idea stresses you out or makes you nervous, you could also just do 4 or 5 strips in one direction and then 4 or 5 strips in the other direction. It's really just about making sure that your strips and your crust are sealed. So every time I work around and see what's needed, I figure out which has to go over and which has to go under. And I simply peel back the strips that have to be over. When I get to the edge, I really don't need a very big piece. And again, I'm trying to stay clear of the bottom crust so that each part of the pie has the same thickness crust. We're nearly done. Here's a final strip, making sure that I'm going under, over, under in a nice lattice weave. Great job, friends. So now I'll take my ice water and dip my fingertips into it. And this is where we're essentially sealing those lattice strips to the bottom crust so that filling doesn't run over. Every baker, every bakery, even supermarket pies, all have a different pattern when it comes to sealing the crust. You might see some that have more of a pinching pattern, some that use more of a fork pattern. I really lean more towards that organic homemade pie appearance, and I just try to give a little bit of a rollover and sort of a wave look. I really do want my pie to look like it was made, in a small batch. I don't want my pies to come out looking like they've been on a factory line. I love this time of pie baking. I always think the pies look so perfect right before they go in the oven. Just a lovely soft dough, symmetrical. Very happy with the way this one came out. Now, washing the crust will give you different outcomes, whether you use what I'm using here. It's a whole egg with equal parts water. You can keep your pie crust plain. You can brush it with cream or half and half. You can do a combination of 1 egg yolk and cream. You can sprinkle your pie crust with non-melting sugar. You can do all sorts of things. It's really personal taste. Thanks so much for watching, friends. I'll see you in the next video.